My business collapsed and I lost my house overnight. I went to my son's place, hoping to stay for a few days. He said, "Dad, my wife isn't comfortable having you here." That night, I slept in my car. The next morning, a butler called me. He said his employer, a dying billionaire, had requested to see me before signing his will. But before we get to that, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it and drop your thoughts in the comments after listening. My name is Thomas, and I lost everything but found a path to settle the scores. The news came on a Tuesday. My factory doors shut for the last time. The bank called and said the loan was called in. I sat at my desk, stared at the stack of bills, and felt a cold knot in my stomach. I thought of the workers. I thought of the machines that would never hum again. I drove home in my old sedan. The streetlights flickered on as I passed. My house was empty, the lights off, the front door ajar. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a long moment. The silence was louder than any argument. Inside, the mortgage papers were on the kitchen table. The foreclosure notice was stamped in red. I could almost hear the lender's voice. "Your assets are seized." My hands trembled, but my face stayed calm. I knew I could not let panic take over. The next day, I called my son. He was married, had a house in the suburbs, a good job. He answered on his second ring. "Dad, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice flat. I told him the truth. I told him the factory was gone. I asked if I could stay a few nights. He hesitated. He could hear my voice shaking, but he tried to keep his tone even. "Dad, my wife isn't comfortable having you here." He paused, then added, "We have a small place. It will be tight." I felt a pang, but I nodded. "I understand." That night I walked to my car. The engine was cold. I sat in the driver's seat, the seatbelt clicking as I fastened it. I opened the back door and laid my head on the seat. The night air rushed in. I could hear distant traffic, the hum of a street lamp. I closed my eyes and tried to rest. The next morning I was still in the car. A phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. I answered. A calm voice said, "Good morning, sir. My name is Graham. I am the butler for Mr. Henry Whitford." I frowned. I had never heard that name before. He continued, "Mr. Whitford is a very old man. He has asked to see you before he signs his will." I sat still. My mind raced. Who was this man? Why would a billionaire want to see a man who just lost his house? I asked, "What does he want from me?" Graham said, "He says you have something he needs. He will explain when you arrive." I felt a flicker of curiosity. I thanked him and hung up. I spent the next hour cleaning my car, making it presentable. I washed the windows. I checked the seats. I saw my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was unkempt, my face tired, but my eyes were steady. I took a deep breath and drove. The address Graham gave was in an upscale part of town. Tall trees lined the road. A long driveway led to a brick manor with tall windows. A valet took my coat and opened the door. Inside, marble floors shone under soft lighting. I was led to a sitting room where a man in a wheelchair waited. His hands rested on a polished wooden table. He looked older than I expected. His hair was thin and white. He smiled faintly. "Thomas," he said, "thank you for coming." I sat down opposite him. He spoke slowly. "I have watched you work your whole life. I know you are a quiet man." He paused. "I need your help." I listened. He told me that his only heir was a son he never met. He had built an empire of hotels, farms, and a large trust. He was dying, and the law required a witness for the will. He wanted me to be that witness. My mind turned over the idea. I could be a part of his final wishes. He explained that the will would give a large sum to the charity that had helped me when I fell on hard times. He also said he wanted to leave a portion of his assets to someone who could use them wisely. He looked at me and said, "I think you are that person." I felt a weight settle in my chest. I thought of my son, his wife, my daughter. I thought of the night I slept in the car. I thought of the loss. I kept my face calm. I said, "I am honored." He nodded. "You will sign tomorrow. I will have my lawyer send the documents." I left the manor with a folder of papers. I drove back home, parked in the same spot where my car had slept. The sky was gray. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of the will, a list of assets, and a note that said, "Your name appears as a co-executor." I stared at the words. I felt a strange calm. The next days were a blur. I signed the papers. I met the lawyer, a thin man with glasses, who explained the clauses. The will gave 5% of Whitford's holdings to a trust I would control. The trust would fund small businesses in my old town. My mind worked quietly, taking in the possibilities. I went back to my son's house to tell him of the meeting. He opened the door with a forced smile. "Dad," he said, "how did it go?" I said, "It went well." He nodded, but his eyes were sharp. "Is there anything you need?" I shrugged. "Just time," he said. "We will have dinner later." I walked past his kitchen, noticing the modern appliances, the sleek countertops. I felt a small sting, but I kept my voice low. Later that night, I called my daughter, Emma. She answered after a few rings. Her voice was soft. "Dad, I'm sorry about everything." I heard her breathing. I said, "You have no reason to be sorry." She whispered, "We are trying." I could hear her kids in the background playing. I felt a pang of regret, but I stayed quiet. Emma said she would meet me tomorrow at a coffee shop. I agreed. I wanted to hear her thoughts. The next morning, I arrived early. The coffee shop smelled of fresh beans. The chairs were wooden. The windows looked out on a busy street. I sat at a corner table and waited. When Emma arrived, she was wearing a plain coat. She looked tired. She sat down and put her hands on the table. "Dad," she said, "I heard about the will." I nodded. "What do you think?" she asked. I looked at her. "I think it could help many," she sighed. "I wish you could have told us earlier." I kept my tone calm. "I did not want to worry you." She stared at me. "Your wife would have liked this." I thought of Laura, my late wife. She had been kind, patient. I missed her more now. Emma smiled faintly. "I will think about how we can use the money," I said. "Let me know if you need ideas." She left, her coat brushing the floor. I watched her walk away, feeling a quiet resolve settle deeper. The next week, I started planning. I called a friend who worked at a law firm. He said he could help set up a private trust. I asked him about the paperwork needed. He explained the steps. I took notes. I wrote down each task. I felt a quiet fire building inside me. I also called a man who owned a small construction company in my old town. He said his business was struggling after my factory closed. I offered to invest in him. He thanked me. I asked him to keep it quiet. He agreed. I felt a small smile on my face. At night, I lay on the couch in my empty house. I thought of the humiliation of being turned away by my own son. I thought of the car where I slept. I thought of the billionaire who had chosen me. My mind turned over the idea of a plan. I would not be a victim. I would be the one who decides the outcome. The final piece of the plan formed in my mind. I would invite my son, his wife, my daughter, and Emma's husband to the wedding of my grandson. The wedding would be at a hotel owned by Whitford. I would make sure the wedding was a big event. I would arrange the seating so that my son and his wife sat far from the front. I would have the ceremony in a hall that I owned, a small hall that I could control. I would have the catering done by a company that I funded. I walked into the wedding hall a week before the event. The hall was bright with white walls and tall windows. The air smelled of fresh paint. I spoke with the manager, a middle-aged woman named Claire. I asked her to let me take over the scheduling. She looked surprised, but she said, "Of course, Mr. Thomas." I thanked her. I felt the first piece fall into place. I spent the next days arranging every detail. I called the florist and chose simple white flowers. I chose a modest cake, but one that had a hidden compartment. I ordered a sound system. I set the lights to dim at the right moment. I printed programs with my name on the top as the host. I wrote each step in a notebook. On the day of the wedding, I arrived early. The hall was empty, the chairs stacked. I walked from one end to the other, checking each row. I imagined my son's face when he saw the hall, the way his wife would glance at the empty chairs. I felt calm. I was ready. The guests began to arrive. My daughter Emma walked in with her husband, a tall man in a suit. They were happy, laughing with their friends. My son Kyle arrived with his wife Jenna. Jenna wore a sleek dress. She smiled politely at me, but I could see a flash of discomfort. I nodded. I kept my eyes steady. The ceremony began. The bride walked down the aisle to a soft piano tune. The groom stood at the altar, smiling. I sat in a corner watching. When the vows were spoken, I felt a quiet pride. My family was united, even if only for a short moment. After the ceremony, the reception began. The lights dimmed, the candles flickered. The band started to play. I stepped up to the microphone. The room fell quiet. I cleared my throat. "Friends," I said, "thank you for being here." I looked at my son. "I have a story to share." The room listened. I spoke slowly. I told them about the collapse of the factory, about the night I slept in a car, about the call from the butler. I kept my voice even, my words plain. I said I had thought I had lost everything. I thought I had no control. I saw Jenna shift in her seat. I continued, "But a man once told me that quiet people can be strong." I paused. I let the silence settle. Then I said, "I have been given a chance to do something good, to give back to the town that raised me." I opened the envelope I was holding. Inside was a deed. I held it up. The paper read, "Deed of transfer, 3,200 square feet of land at 45 River Road, transferred to Thomas, co-executor of the Whitford Trust." There was a gasp. I could see the surprise on Kyle's face. Jenna's eyes widened. Emma leaned forward. I placed the deed on the table. "This land is where my old factory stood," I said. "It is now my property again. I plan to rebuild." The room fell still. I could sense the tension rise. I then said, "There is more." I lifted my hand, and a second envelope fell from the table. I opened it. It contained a check for $3 million, payable to the Whitford Trust, with the condition that the trust be managed by me and my family. A murmur ran through the guests. Jenna whispered to Kyle, "How did he get this?" Kyle looked angry, his jaw clenched. I could see the hurt in his eyes. I kept my tone calm. "I was asked to be a co-executor," I said. "The well-wisher wanted this money to help the town." I could feel the weight of their stares. I took a breath. "You can help too." I looked at Emma. "If you want to start a small bakery, I can fund it." I looked at my son. "If you want to invest in your own business, I can give you a loan." I spoke with certainty. The after-dinner speeches began. Kyle stood up, his voice shaking. He said, "Dad, we thought you were done. We thought we could leave you behind." He took a breath. "We were wrong." He looked at Jenna, his eyes softening. "I am sorry." He turned to me. "Will you let us be part of this?" I nodded. The tension eased. The room relaxed. I felt a quiet triumph. I had turned their disrespect into a shared future. The night went on. The band played. The guests ate and laughed. I sat with my daughter watching the kids run. I felt a warm feeling in my chest. The plan had worked. After the wedding, I walked outside. The night air was cool. I stood under the stars. I thought of the car where I had slept. I thought of the call from the butler. I thought of my quiet life before everything fell apart. I realized that silence can be powerful. It can hold plans. It can hold patience. It can hold the seeds of a new future. I felt at peace. The next morning, I called the lawyer again. We signed the papers that made the trust official. I also signed a lease on the land to start a small workshop. I hired a few of the old workers. They smiled when they saw the sign, "Thomas Repair Shop, open." My son Kyle called. He said he wanted to help with the paperwork. He apologized for his earlier words. He promised to be there more often. I heard sincerity in his voice. I told him, "We start fresh." He agreed. Emma called later that day. She said she wanted to open a bakery on the new land. She asked if she could use part of the trust fund for equipment. I said yes. She laughed. "Dad, you are amazing," she said. I felt a smile break across my face. Jenna arrived at the house with a tray of cookies. She placed them on my table. "You did well," she said. I nodded. We all did. The room felt warm. Months passed. The workshop opened. The bakery opened. The town slowly revived. The old factory site became a hub for small businesses. The Whitford Trust funded a new park. The grandchildren played there. My son's business grew. He hired more workers. He thanked me often. I kept my calm. I watched my family rebuild. I felt my purpose. One evening, I sat on the porch watching the sunset. The house was quiet. My wife's picture sat on the mantel, a reminder of what kept me going. I thought about how quickly life can change. I thought about the night I slept in my car. I thought about the call that changed everything. I realized that the real surprise was not the money, not the land, but the fact that my quiet nature allowed me to stay alive enough to see the future unfold. I felt a deep gratitude. The children ran past, shouting, "Grandpa!" I waved. Their laughter echoed. I felt a steady heartbeat. I knew that I had turned a moment of disrespect into a chance for all of us to thrive. If this story resonated with you, join our channel by liking and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.